Welcome to Future Day 2024. It's the 19th time we do this broadcast, and the theme from 2024 are the importance of having the detoxification step in a circular economy.
I wish you all welcome to this event. My name is Lars Tolgén, and I'm the secretary of this foundation founded by Ragnar Sellberg some 30 years ago. And we are one of the stakeholders for this event, and we are really looking forward to the content of this day. And the management of the day is Per, and I hope that you will find this day interesting. I sure will. Thank you, Per.
Thank you so much, Lars. And yes, this is the Future Day, the day when we look ahead what the latest research say, but also try to point out solutions, what is possible and what is not possible. And of course, we like to make sure that you have the latest science available, and we also like to spread the knowledge. The foundation was founded in 1991 by Ragnar, but also by Ragn-Sells as a company that I represent. But also the municipalities, Habo and Upplands-Bro municipality close by, but also the two universities, KTH and SLU. And I believe that already back then in 1991, when Ragnar founded this, he wanted to see progress. He wanted to move away from a waste society to something else. And now the focus is on circular economy. So I think that he understood the potential going forward. This year we have dedicated to a very special theme. It's about the need to detoxify circular material flows. And this we believe is a key component going forward if we're going to succeed with the circular transformation. We will start with 3 keynotes giving the state of play, what is on the table. Then we have this year tried to move into more back to the basics, meaning that we are more connected to the science. So we have had a pitch competition among students in Sweden, and we will present the winner of this pitch competition. And then after that, after the break, we will also then deep dive into the solutions and end with a concluding panel. Really great to be here and really great to have this big audience, and also, of course, all viewers of the scene. But I will start now by introducing our first keynote speaker, and we'll start with a global perspective. We'll talk about the planetary challenges, our planetary boundaries. I had the honor in 2009, together with Professor Johan Rockström, to be on the stage at COP15 in Copenhagen. I back then worked with developing a carbon labeling scheme for food. And then I suddenly heard this professor for 1 minute speak about the 9 planetary boundaries. Since 2009, a lot had happened, and the 9 planetary boundaries has become a guiding principle for, I would say, all nations around the world, especially UN, but also when we talk about European Union. So really glad to have Professor McLeod here, and you will deep dive into one of the 9 planetary boundaries, what's now called the novel entities. And this is about how the state of play when it comes to pollution in the world. So please, on the stage, and give a big hand for Professor McLeod.
Thank you very much for this introduction. How many people before just 5 seconds ago have heard about the planetary boundaries? Okay, it's about half. So I will talk a little bit about the background, and then I will, as promised, talk specifically about the planetary boundary for novel entities, which I've been working on also since about 2009 and thinking about. I come from the Department of Environmental Science at Stockholm University, just down the road, but I'm going to start the story even before I moved to Stockholm when I was still living in Switzerland. We just heard about this 2009 paper, which was published in Nature by Johan Rockström and his colleagues from the Stockholm Resilience Center, which is also a research institute affiliated with Stockholm University. When this paper came out, it was for me super interesting because I am an environmental scientist And at the time, I had fairly recently moved to Europe and started working at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. And we were working specifically on chemical pollution issues in the environment. And out into the world came this paper from Johan Rockström that put basically all of the world's big challenges into one picture and called it the planetary boundaries. And this picture is this one. You see the Earth underneath this picture. And then in each of these dimensions, these pie slices are climate change, ocean acidification, stratospheric ozone depletion, nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, freshwater use, land use, biodiversity, aerosol loading. These are the big challenges that are confronting humanity with maintaining sustainability of the planet. And then there is chemical pollution. And I was really happy to see chemical pollution included here as one of these global challenges, because in my background, I had worked with global pollutants quite a lot, work on the Stockholm Convention on polychlorinated biphenyls and on persistent organic pollutants, and especially at understanding these at the global scale using measurements and modeling. So I was very happy to see chemical pollution here. And then at the same time, I was disappointed because you see underneath chemical pollution, it says not yet quantified. And the thing about the planetary boundaries that I think makes it really useful as an intellectual construct is that they are boundaries. And in each of these dimensions, Johan Rockström and his team, they challenged scientists to set quantitative boundaries for things like, for climate change, carbon dioxide concentrations and methane concentrations in the atmosphere that should not be transgressed in order to keep the Earth in a stable Holocene-like state. So this framework is really powerful as long as you can define these boundaries. And so although chemical pollution was included here, that it didn't have a quantitative boundary or any set boundary was, for me, a bit disappointing, because you still can't really communicate very effectively about this. You can say, well, chemical pollution is a global problem, but we don't know how big of a problem. So we, in my old working group in Zurich, we discussed this paper quite a lot over lunch and at different times. And already there, we came as environmental chemists. We took a sort of chemistry approach to this, or a chemistry view of this. And we already recognized that 5 of these 9 planetary boundaries are actually governed by chemical agents. Climate change is carbon dioxide. Ocean acidification is, again, carbon dioxide. Stratospheric ozone depletion is these halocarbons, which get into the stratosphere and cause ozone depletion around the poles. Nitrogen and phosphorus cycles are man-made perturbances of natural biogeochemical cycles. And then there's chemical pollution. So given that that 5 of these 9 are directly mitigated by chemical pollution, we got to thinking that maybe we can define a more workable definition of the chemical pollution boundary. And by then I had moved to Stockholm University, and I got a few other people interested in this, and I found other people interested in this in my new department at the Department of Environmental Science. And actually, we got a little seed money from the department to do work with Lynn Persson of the Stockholm Environment Institute. And she started to coordinate just brainstorming meetings among our working group. And we gave ourselves the mission to provide a workable definition of this chemical pollution boundary so that we could draw a boundary in this picture and make the whole framework more powerful for chemical pollution. So out of this working group, which involved lots of us at Stockholm University, we came to the conclusion that we should really be worried about chemical pollution that poses what we called, or what we defined as, a planetary boundary threat. And these threats are chemicals that can disrupt the Earth system and where we cannot easily uncross that or undo that damage, that disruptive damage, once it's happened. And this is, if you think about it, this is what climate change is. When we cause climate change, the new climate system will be what it is, and we won't be able to go back. And the halocarbon depletion of stratospheric ozone is kind of the same. We realized this problem, we did something to stop it, but we still have ozone holes decades later over both poles actually, but mostly over the South Pole. So we should be really worried about unknown planetary boundary threats. This would mean the use of chemicals in a way that we could cause an Earth disruption or a disruption of the Earth system that's not easy to transgress. Because we hope, humanity is intelligent enough that if we know about a planetary boundary threat, we won't trigger it and cause it. And you can argue about this when you think about especially the climate change boundary, that we know about this, but we're triggering it anyway. But we, at least in terms of chemical pollution, we thought we should be smarter than this and be able to avoid these known planetary boundary threats. So we came up with a list of chemicals, of properties of chemicals that would make them unknown planetary boundary effect, or unknown planetary boundary effect, or unknown planetary boundary threats, sorry. The first is that you have to have a chemical that causes a disruption to the Earth system process. We're calling these unknown, so let's just assume that we don't know this, that we can be releasing chemicals into the environment, they can be damaging the environment or human health in a way that we're not aware of. And we have to accept this, that we're sometimes ignorant about the effects of chemicals that we put out into the environment. The second is that this effect isn't discovered until it will become a problem at the planetary scale. And then the third is that we can't reverse it. And with these three conditions, actually, we could set up a little system for doing hazard assessments of chemicals to be planetary boundary threats. And we published this work in a couple of papers in Environmental Science and Technology in 2013 and in 2014, where we defined this system for screening chemical contaminants for potential to be threats to the whole functioning of the Earth ecosystem. And we were happy because a year later in 2015, a lot of our ideas were picked up by Johan Rockström's original group. And this is a picture of a refined version of the planetary boundary chart that we saw at the beginning. Now from this paper by Will Steffen, as the lead author, where now chemical pollution is gone, but it's replaced with this novel entities pie chart. And in the discussion section of this paper, they talk a lot about our work on identifying how chemical pollution could be a planetary boundary threat. And they expanded this definition even to include things that might be material contaminants, like now we see lots of talk about nano and microplastics. Nanomaterials were still something that was being talked about. These novel entities could also be biological in origin, novel biological agents that humanity produces. So this was a step forward. In the meantime, I kept thinking about this. And in those environmental science and technology papers I showed earlier, the properties of pollution that would make it a planetary boundary threat among them are global exposure and poor reversibility of the pollution. And I got quite interested in plastic pollution in the last few years. And we published, and eventually together with some co-authors, we published this paper in Science, identifying plastic pollution as a global threat within this planetary boundary framework, and also in some ways even outside of that planetary boundary framework. Because plastic pollution, we know, is globally distributed. It's poorly reversible, not only because it's persistent, but also because we are addicted to plastic in the same way we're addicted to carbon dioxide emissions. So it won't be reversible if we identify unacceptable consequences of this plastic pollution. And just as a sort of warning about these unknown effects, now that plastic is on the radar for researchers worldwide, there's more and more studies of what possible effects could be of plastic. And just this year, in one of these journals affiliated with the New England Journal of Medicine, there was this paper, which is a study of people who go to their doctors because they've had heart attacks or strokes. And the doctors here in Italy took samples of blood clots from the circulatory system of these people and then did follow-ups over the course of 3 or 5 years. And they found that patients who had detectable levels of micro or nanoplastics in the blood clots that they took out of them had something like a 3 to 4 times higher risk of having a recurrence of a stroke or a heart attack within the study period. So this was the beginning of, a landmark study that linked microplastic exposure to human health problems. And this is the kind of effect, a 3 or 4 times increase in potential for heart attacks and strokes, that could have been going on for generations that we just haven't been realizing because we haven't been looking for it. Because there are many things that contribute to your risk of heart attack. So a factor of 3 increase from exposure to plastic is something we might not have necessarily known to look for or be aware of, even as it was continuing to go on. So this is an example of an unknown effect of a global, or a potential example of an unknown effect of a global pollution issue. Another example, and Hannah's going to talk more about the PFAS in particular, but one of my colleagues who is also involved in these papers is Ian Cousins, and he proposed a couple of years later that the perfluoroalkyl substances also meet these definitions. So with this in the background, in around about 2020, just kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, Sarah Cornell from the Stockholm Resilience Center got a mandate to try to define this planetary boundary for novel entities. And I was part of a working group that met virtually on Zoom over the course of the pandemic to work on this definition. And we did a lot of thinking in this working group about how to define along the pathway of production and use of chemicals and other novel entities through their pathways in the environment through to effects. Where could we draw a boundary? And we really wanted to make a quantitative boundary for novel entity pollution to put into this planetary boundary framework. This is all against the backdrop of our realization that chemical pollution is just getting bigger and more diverse over time. And within this paper, we included this figure showing basically exponential rise. This is a logarithmic scale, so this is exponential rises in total industry production of chemicals, production of raw material chemicals that go into production of plastics, and it's all going up exponentially. And simultaneously, there are people inventorying all these chemicals and finding, for example, 350,000 chemical substances that you can buy in commerce. And just in plastics, there's over 16,000 chemicals, some up to 4,000 of them having hazardous properties according to screening criteria defined by the European Chemicals Agency. So against this backdrop, we couldn't find a quantitative boundary, but we decided we had to be precautionary. And so in this paper, we proposed that the boundary for novel entities is exceeded whenever production and releases of novel entities outstrips our capacity to understand them. And this is because we have this problem of ignorance. We don't necessarily know what their effects are. They're truly novel things that we're putting in the environment. When we don't know, we should be precautionary. We're probably over the boundary. And this made some news when this came out, that we had said we were over this boundary. And the new version of the chemical pollution, or the planetary boundary framework, actually now illustrates us as exceeding this novel entity boundary based on this definition. Quickly, just a couple of implications for this. You may have heard, if you're trained as a toxicologist, about Paracelsus. He says the dose makes the poison. I submit that this is actually wrong. It's a foundation of toxicological assessment of chemicals, but it's wrong especially when you consider long-term population level exposures. And the reason that it's wrong is we don't know how to test for those without exposing a population for the long term and doing epidemiological studies. And a couple of examples here. The tolerable daily intake for bisphenol A has fallen by about 250,000 times in 20 years. The tolerable daily intake for perfluoroalkyl substances went from probably they're non-toxic to there is no safe level in the course of about 20 years. And that's because we exposed the whole population to these chemicals and then studied them epidemiologically. It also means, I think, for the circular economy, that we have to simplify this whole system. And the topic here was about detoxification, and I thought I'd just put in a couple words about what I think when I think of detoxification. Right now, our whole technosphere is permeated by a whole bunch of chemicals, and we don't fully understand all of them. We certainly don't understand most of them. We'll talk about detoxification, but I think the most effective way to detoxify is not to toxify in the first place. And that means simplifying the mix of chemicals that we use, especially in commodity materials, to the point where we can handle them in bulk. And there will always be specialty products where you can't simplify, but I think we should be working towards simplification of a lot of our material flows in this whole system. So maybe I'm out of time. No, okay, so summary. We have defined this planetary boundary for novel entities. We defined it, but we didn't quantify it. But we can look at this definition that we should understand what we're doing to the Earth system, especially with poorly reversible, globally exposed or contaminants that cause global exposure. We're not currently in that situation, so we assert that we're outside of this boundary. Quantifying that boundary wasn't feasible, but we can get a workable definition. And it's based on precaution, basically. We should be more careful about what we're doing to the global environment to avoid stratospheric ozone depletion, global population exposed to perfluorinated chemicals, which are certainly having health effects, plastic exposure to the whole environment with unknown effects that we could discover in the next decades. And we should be taking precautionary active action, especially to find alternatives to chemicals that cause global exposure and are poorly reversible. And also these chemicals where there are technological monopolies. We should be skeptical about any chemical or any novel entity that's fulfilling a function that's critical to our society where there are no options. And this is the example for plastics and for carbon dioxide, for fossil fuel use. We should be trying to diversify our away from reliance on technological monopolies. And then finally, simplify this mix of chemicals, starting right at the production side.
Thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. I had the honor to be in New York now in September and took part in a roundtable discussion with UNEP about the coming global plastic treaty. The final round of negotiations will take place in Korea in the end of October, beginning of November. And the big discussion we had there was the importance to make sure that if we're going to use plastic, we need to make sure that the plastic doesn't contain unharmed or harming substances. Because if we're going to be able to create circularity, because that also UNEP stress is important, then we need to make sure that we produce it in the right way. Your comment and wish about the global plastic treaty, have you seen anything or discussed anything about that?
I've not been directly involved. There's a group of scientists like Bethany Almroth at Chalmers who are in an NGO that actually has observer status at the treaty. So there are scientists who've been there and offering input. I haven't been active in that, but I think that these kind of initiatives are what we need on the additives side, simplification of the additives and understanding them. I also think the plastic itself could be a problem. And this is where this Italian paper about the blood clots is about physical impacts of plastic particles. And so I have actually written opinion articles that say the plastics treaty should be aiming at caps on production and emission, because I think the problem is urgent enough that we should be doing something now and as quickly as possible, and something that will really affect the volumes of total plastic moving through the system. And I think that's only possible with production caps. You have to create an economic incentive also to make the plastic waste valuable. And if you have a cap on virgin plastic production, I think this does this. I'm not so optimistic that these kind of caps are going to be part of the treaty in the end, because now it's under a hard deadline and there's some hard opposition to this. But I think that if we're really serious about it, that's what we should be talking about.
I totally agree. I believe, though, that if we can make sure that the plastics has a value, then we will recirculate more, and we will not litter. We'll avoid a lot of the problems that we see today.
Yeah,
the problem is that the plastic has not a value today.
And it's because it's much cheaper to make plastic from primary raw materials than it is to make it to recycle.
Yep.
And so you know better than me about this, of course, but I think that's why a production cap on virgin plastic is, if you're serious about this, that's what you have to do.
You will come back in the last part of the panel, but I'd like to ask one more question. What's around the corner when it comes to the research about novel entities? What's happening? Because this was published in 2022, your work, and then the new version of the planetary boundaries was then, with all the planetary boundaries assessed, was presented in 2023. But what is happening? What's the next step? What is around the corner?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because now we have filled in, actually in the most recent paper, all of the boundaries have now been defined and most of them are quantified except for the novel entities. For me, as someone who's interested in the novel entities, I'm interested now in discovery of the highest priority problems or the highest priority potential planetary boundary threats, the next chlorofluorocarbons that cause stratospheric ozone depletion. So in my department, lots of us work on perfluoroalkyl substances. I'm working a lot on plastics because I see this as a great candidate for being the next real example of novel entities. And then I'm trying to do communication about this. I really think the biggest value of this planetary boundary concept is communication and interest awareness, because it's something that you can really understand. You look at this picture and you see that we have these problems in all these different dimensions. And the challenge is great, but I think we can do something. We can do productive things to address this. So I'm also working a lot on raising awareness about this and then trying to be the one who discovers some of these new problems, which is a bit of a depressing, it's not a solution-oriented way to work, but as an environmental scientist, we're a little bit stuck with problem identification rather than working on the solution side.
Thank you so much, Professor. And by that, we will go into the next session. I'm very delighted to have Professor Mattias Lindahl from Linköping University. He has been part of the Swedish delegation for circular economy, and he dedicated to the material flows and how to make sure that the circular economy can be something that we work with on more, not just on a national level, on international level. He also works internationally for the standardization development of the standards for circular economy. So please, Mattias Lindahl, you will now touch upon the detoxification perspective and how maybe we should switch from the ladder of Lansing to something else that guides us going forward. So please, Professor.
Thank you very much, and hope you can hear me well. Really happy to be here and have a quite condensed presentation, but it will be available after this presentation. I've been working in this area for now soon 30 years, and I've seen a lot of things happening. The awareness is higher now, and I think that is good. I've been working with companies. I will have more of a solution perspective in my presentation. And but I will take a step back and actually have a historical review. Why we ended up in this situation? Why do we have this problem? And if we go back in time, we were living in a society that lacked resources. And the resources we had in possession was quite simple, not that advanced. We have iron, we had wood, and all the resources we had to guard ourselves, basically, and then we had to make the products. But over the time, we have developed, today our products are more complex, and I just give an example here with bikes. We have also more advanced materials, and because we managed, due to the Industrial Revolution, being able to access. And we've gone from this idea of, in the old days, we made products that would be easy to repair, share, durable, etc., into something else. And I will come back to why we ended up into something else. We have gone from quite simple manufacturing like this into very, very complex value chains. And that is relying upon that fact that we have different actors doing different things. Very, very complex. And we have tried to optimize our production. And one way to optimize the production and the creation of products is actually to make also more advanced materials and more complex materials. And we have also much more of a mix of the different materials. When we had this industrial revolution kicking in, we continued the idea of making products that are durable, etc. But what happens if we continue to sell these type of products? We get secured markets. And in the 19th century, in the beginning of 1910, there started to be a big concern among factory owners and also politicians. What will happen if we have a lot of people that are suddenly they don't have any job in the factories, and a lot of factories closing down? We need to keep society calm and nice, and we need to keep the factories ongoing. And how to do that? A lot of thinkers were called in, and I used to talk about this guy when I have my presentations because he is quite not well known. This is Victor Lebow. He had a big influence on the automotive industry, but in UK and US, but the industry itself had a big impact on the rest of society. And he summarized his ideas of how to make things and the factories ongoing in this article and this quote. And he stated that our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our ego satisfaction, spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever-accelerating rate. The American way, the American dream. And at the time, I mean, no one could see and understood the environmental consequences. But from an employment perspective, a factory perspective, this was good, and societal perspective. And we started to shape our society to actually making this as efficient and effective as possible. And as a consequence, we had this ladder of lead and zinc thinking. We should actually, in the old days, we were focusing on prevention, reuse, and recycling. Now it was a focus on actually landfill and incineration. It was even plans that it should be legally not allowed to own products more than a few years. Then it should be destroyed. And we can also see that, I mentioned that we have tried to optimize the products, and Matthew mentioned very good there, more complex materials. And just to optimize the production. We're not really thought about what will happen later on. And a lot of things will happen later on. For example, with microplastics, when plastics are broken down. But it's not only plastic, there are a lot of other materials. I will come back to that later on. And we have a lot of then materials ended up in this. From quite sorted materials, and then we spread it out in society, and suddenly we have just a big mix. And contaminations. And I will use this, the butterfly diagram. How many of you have seen this before? A few of you. I will use it in a different way. And when Ellen MacArthur Foundation presented this, a lot of people thought, okay, we should have more loops. And I think that because I talked with Ken Webster, one of the founding father of the concept and ideas, that was not their idea. It was actually to have fewer loops. And the loops should be as close as possible. Because every loop increases the risk, and the longer the loops, of unwanted material accumulation. And also losses. I forgot to mention that. Losses, that you have losses in the system. So I think that is also a problem. But if we look into society, what we have is more and more of longer, more risky loops in society, making it harder. And we have also have tendency to forget one important thing, and I'll try to explain this in a very, very quick way. Because when talking about circular economy, it's quite easy to understand we will never end up in a complete 100% circular economy. It's not even wanted from a environmental perspective. And I think that is important, but what we can do is move towards as circular as possible by optimizing and doing things. And I'll come back to one way we could do in order to achieve this. And just give an example. Let's say you have running shoes, and then you have 100% of new production of running shoes, then you will end up on the left side of this figure. Then we try to have 100% recycling, then we'll end up on the right side in this figure. But in order to have this 100% recycling in theory, then we need to run along the roads, etc., where we have been running, picking up all the atoms in order to be able to actually have 100%. But then what we have forgotten is that we also need a system for creating this circulation, reuse. And that system itself will require resources. A system that itself not necessarily circular. So what we can do is try to optimize. We will have a minimum here. But what we can do by doing certain things, we can, for example, redesign a zone, make it easy to take back, easy to recycle, easy to reuse, and then move this minimum towards the right. I hope you understand the figure. And so, we have this society, and then I will go to the next, because now we have a problem in society in general. That problem is that we continuously focus on making things more efficient. And that is good, but it should never be the starting point. And we have built a society that is trying to make the traditional business model of selling things as efficient as possible. But as I mentioned, it should not be the starting point. The starting point should always be, what is the most effective thing to do? What is the right thing to do? And then we should make that efficient. This implies that we might need to change our way of doing things. Not just making the recycling a little bit more efficient. Maybe we should take a step back, rethinking the whole way of doing it. And that links to Peter Drucker, that stated, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it's to act with yesterday's logic. So what we need to do is rethink and don't use the logic that Victor Lebov and his fellows wanted us to use. And one way, the starting point, is to actually rethink this one, the ladder of Lansing. Because we know that the best is on the top, prevention, and the worst is landfill. We should also think about actually changing it. We should change it not from the waste hierarchy, actually talk about the resource pyramid. Resource, because resource is something nice. That is something we want to work with. Waste is boring. And if you start to think about it, waste is actually a resource. Now, I don't have time to go into it, but in the new standard for circular economy, we are actually defining waste from a resource perspective, not up the other way around. Circular economy is a concept that has been growing, and in short, this is from the new standard about circular economy, where I've been actually heavily involved in crafting. And we are talking about the circular economy is an economy that uses a systemic approach to maintain a circular flow of resources by recovering, retaining, or adding to the value while contributing to sustainable development. So the focus is here on value, to keep the value high, because without value, it makes sense to actually circulate things. And I think this is important. A lot of companies are interested in this, and I would say not from an environmental perspective. Sorry to say, environmental things are positive, a bonus, but it's because this is in line with what they have always been trying to do, actually create as much value as possible with as little resources and losses as possible over time. But you see they can do it in another way if they also start to change the business model, focusing on the function, service during the use, not just selling the products. In order to do so, you also need to think in a different way, and that the concept circular economy can be misleading. A lot of people thinking, okay, we should take back, etc. Thinking about turning back. But I used to say that circular economy is not about sending resources back. It's actually sending them back to the future. And I think this is important because what we now place on the market as resources or products, we need to have an idea how in the future we can handle and treat those in a smart way. That implies, in some cases, you also have time to prepare for how to do it, but we need already now, when designing, for example, the materials, think about how can then later on be done. In the standard, we also have developed some principles, and I must then mention that it has been more than 1,000 experts around the world, more than 100 countries involved in this work, crafting those principles. That is actually based on research, a lot of research. And of course, systemic thinking is always important, but then we also need to have this value creation and value sharing in a different way. Because in order to make this circulation doable, it might be that we need to share values from the benefits we can get from the system with other actors needed in the system. Otherwise, it will not happen. But we also need to improve our resource stewardship and resource traceability over time. I know it's a lot of text, but you have the text later on. So I think this is important, but we also need to have a broader perspective. We can't just look into value chains. We also need to look into value networks to understand how resources are flowing in society, and also have more communication over time and with other actors. We also need to go back to the basic principles, strategies that once upon a time were actually, of natural reasons, needed. Think about actually refuse. Do I really need to have this product? If you think, reduce, reuse, etc., and take them back. And they make sense in a more circular economy when you're not just selling the products, but actually are focusing on the provided value over time. When mentioning those, I also want to stress one thing, because I've heard so many people misunderstanding this. They think I should only pick one of these, but actually what you should do is try to combine them. Just because you are focusing on refusing or rethinking doesn't mean that you should not also take in consideration repairing, refurbishing, etc. So try it as you as an organization, but also together with your value network, value chain, think how can we do this in the smartest way? Rethinking things. Then we also need to think about how we how the flow of resources are going in our society. This is from a report that ICC published, and Per, you were heavily involved in. This is a model that shows how we should think about resources in our society and how things are flowing. Because it's during the use phase we actually get the value from something. But it's normally also during the use phase we have the main environmental impact from something. But what we should try still is anyway to keep the use phase as long as possible by different types of means. For example, maybe repair, refurbish, remanufacturing, repurpose. We should really try to avoid this, the fact that we need to dispose something. But when trying to optimize this, we still need to think about the resources needed for this, the different activities like refurbishment. Because in doing that, it might be that we need to take out some components, some materials, because otherwise the product will be contaminated, the one we are using. So we should take out the unwanted resources from our material flows, but we should try to keep as clean flows as possible. I will come back to that in a few seconds, because I have a lot of things to say and I would like to say. But So try to keep the flows as clean as possible, but we can't neglect the fact that the system itself also needs resources to be operating. I will give an example, because in order to achieve this, we also need to rethink the way we are selling products and services. And one company that I've been working with since 2003 is Toyota Material Handling. At the time I started work with them, they called BT, and they are located in Mjölby. And this is from the marketing material, stating that don't buy trucks. Don't buy trucks. It makes sense to use a fleet of trucks to facilitate efficient material handling, but you don't have to own it to use it. Instead, rent it from us. And that is what I've been focusing on since more than 20 years. In the old days, they wanted to sell as many forklift trucks as possible. But now, instead of selling as many, they are trying to really understand the customer needs, and then they are setting out a fleet of forklift trucks to the customer, and they have gone from rental contracts that were 3 to 5 years up to 10, 12 years. And when the customer don't need the forklift trucks any longer, they are taking the forklift trucks back and refurbishing them, fixing them into new ones, and putting them out for new customers. By doing this, they have a better control of the material flows, resources, and it's in their interest to do different things. So things in a different way. Because what happens if the supplier takes the full responsibility? Traditionally, service and spare parts, important for the profit. But if the supplier takes responsibility, all spare parts becomes a cost, something you want to reduce. And if the offer is not working, for example, malfunctioning, the customer don't pay. And the shift here is, the focus is from selling new products to satisfying the customer as long as possible. But that is not everything. Because it also becomes very, very interesting that the materials, the resources you have in the forklift trucks, for in this case, are clean, are easy to reduce, and so you can have a high value of the used materials if you can't use it as a product or a component. Big, big change. And they prefer then to use components instead of just scrap it. That's why I think Pyrolys is not a good solution, maybe in the end. Finally, I will come into, because I'm not too sure about the time, but
It's okay.
I've been involved, and actually I initiated a product some years ago called Unity, because it was a big fuss about the plastic. And I could see that in this sector, it has been very much of a focus, constantly coming up with new formulas, optimizing normally just for the production, without any consideration of what will happen and what challenges would it be in recycling. And we can see that it's hard if you have 10,000 different types. It's hard really to sort them out in the end. Do you remember the pile of waste? Mix of a lot of different plastic. It's hard to sort them. And it's a risk that the different plastic would contaminate each other as well. And then the idea was, is it possible to reduce the number of today's thermoplastics? And a lot of people said, no, it's impossible. Definitely not possible. But we actually did a survey within the Swedish plastic sector, from the raw material producers to the recycling companies, and to see is it possible. And the idea was actually, instead of having so many, to see could we with fewer, but ones, having ones that actually cover much bigger, can handle a lot of more properties needed for products. And the thing is that then people thought, no, this is good. Even the producer of the plastic material thought this could be good. And interesting thing here, the ones producing products thought this is very, very good, because it's quite problematic also handle that many types of plastic in the production. and so the idea of reducing number of additives, have more standardized plastic, was considered to be a good way. And I think this is a way forward, in line with what you mentioned, because if you have fewer, we can still have the properties we want, but we don't allow that many different types. And now we are looking into the same thing for actually metals, steel alloys. We have the same problem there. I would say it's even worse. So in summary, conclusions, ensure that resource flows are clearly defined. That is a lesson learned, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a production perspective, business perspective. Turn the ladder of Lansing upside down into a resource pyramid. Track resources in society, knowing where they are and when they will become available again. I think this is knowledge that is now lacking. So we can plan future needs. Avoid mixing and combining materials that could contaminate each other. And we have a lot of that nowadays in our society. Creating business models focus on value creation during use rather than based on sales. And finally, standardize and reduce material variations, but develop those that can meet a wider range of performance requirements. So, with that I would like to close and take questions. And I also have some links to some reports where you can find more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that the combination of having a resource focus, maybe a right resource pyramid, together with the report you mentioned from ICC. In the beginning of October, I was in Paris, and we had a follow-up discussion about the report. And the discussion was that in the model that you have then, it is you together with a colleague that has developed this model. It is in each and every step we have a detoxification element.
Yes.
So it means that you have a qualification, should we use it or not? And this we discussed at ICC is that this can maybe also support us to reduce the challenges we face with the Basel Convention. Basel Convention means that you can't transport hazardous waste. You should keep it. And the problem is if you are free trade and like to trade resources that have been recycled, suddenly the Basel Convention or the waste shipment becomes more complicated. And then, of course, we can't compete with virgin resources. So this model could be a way to convince Basel Convention to say, well, if we have this detoxification step, then it should be free of trading. I don't know, what's your opinion?
I agree, and that's why I thought that this model was important to actually create and show, because there are a lot of things related to this. It's also, now you know that in European Union we want to have more of the demanded reuse of material, but then it even becomes more important to have this in mind, because if we are starting to take back, forcing, for example, in plastic, have 30% recycled plastic, it's a high risk that we will actually have accumulations of hazardous substances that from the beginning was not hazardous, but when combining and mixing will become hazardous. And one loop, and then we do it a second loop, a third loop, it can be really, really dangerous if we don't think about this from the beginning, that we need to make some detoxification already in the beginning. And that is about plastic, but then if we look into metals, it could be even worse.
Yesterday at 5 o'clock, European Economic Social Committee, one of two council committees for the Commission. There's regions, in every region in Europe has a seat in that. And then we have the European Economic Social Committee where business and NGOs are included. They come up with a report saying, well, we need to move from waste plants to resource plants. And I send it to you, and what is your reflection, just briefly going through it?
Yeah, I went through it briefly, and I think this is, I mean, it's not only me or you talking about this need of changing mindset. This is, I would say, key. Because if I can take just a step back, it's because this is also related to the words we are using. The words are affecting us heavily, how we are thinking and acting. And I will give an example that I normally talk about when having this type of situations. Let's say I sell fluffy, nice white towels, and you're in the need of fluffy white towels, and the price is the correct one, for you, correct one. Most likely you could consider buying them from me for that price, but the second I tell you they are second-hand, are you still willing to pay the same price? Most likely not. And you will also be concerned about the quality. because that is something you have learned from childhood. Second-hand should not be considered as having the same price as the new one. At the same time, you have been staying in hotels. I've been staying in a lot of hotels. I've never seen someone going down to the lobby complaining about the fact that they're using second-hand towels that have been used to dry things you don't want to think about, and blankets, etc. So coming back to this about focus on resources, waste is considered to be something negative. If we have waste, people also tend to treat it in a poorer way than if we are handling resources. But so there are a lot of things, layers in this, but it's needed. We need to think about this as a resource, and a resource for the next use phase, and then the next use phase of society.
Back to the report in the end, in the panel discussion, because I have some announcements to do as well. In the end, will happen next with that. I would like to thank you, Professor, and we really like to have you back in the panel.
Thank you.
So we started with the planetary boundaries. Now we have talked about the circular economy and the importance of making sure that we can have a detoxification step in each and every step to qualify that the product, the resources are possible to recycle. Then now we will go back into the chemistry. And I will invite, in this case, Dr. Hanna Holmqvist. She is from ChemSec. And we move back now into the topic of PFAS. And what areas of measures can be taken to prevent PFAS from being emitted into our ecosystem? Can we maybe even phase it out, or can this be the things that stops the circular transformation? So please, Hanna, stage is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for that nice introduction. So my talk is termed PFAS do not belong in circular material flows. And I will start by telling you a bit about ChemSec, because maybe many of you in the audience do not know what we do. So ChemSec is an environmental NGO. We aim to reduce the use of hazardous substances, and we have a strong focus on PFAS. We cooperate with different stakeholders to drive this change to safer chemicals. So this is why I'm here, for example, to talk with you and learn from you and teach you hopefully a bit about PFAS and how we can get rid of them. And we do this with funding from the Swedish government and from various charity funds. And how do we do this? What work do we do? We're 12 people at ChemSec, so we are a little organization, but I think we have quite a lot of effect out in society. We drive political discussion on hazardous chemicals, so we are involved in the EU mainly, in the discussion setting the regulatory framework on hazardous substances. We challenge companies to improve their chemicals management, but we also help companies to improve their chemicals management by developing online tools. So you will see a few examples with focus on PFAS in a bit. And we inform investors about risks and opportunity in the chemical industry, because it's of course money that drives our society. So we need to work on where the money is. And my co-presenters here, they concluded in the end, but I want to give you my 3 main arguments up front. So this is what you will hear about. You can stop listening now after this slide if you like. My message, my first and most important message, is that we must turn off the tap. We have to stop using PFAS, because the problem will only grow if we continue using these substances. The good thing is that we can turn off the tap. We have alternatives available, so we can do a substitution. We can reduce the amount of PFAS in use and the amount of PFAS emitted. And for this theme, for this talk here, circular economy could threaten an effective phase out if we are not careful when we do this introduction to a circular economy. And I will address some of these issues here. I'm a toxicologist, so I will go into, what are PFAS and why should we be very careful with the PFAS. I'm not an engineer, so I will not give you the actual answers on how to solve this circular economy technological challenges, but I think other people will cover that. So I think this is what I got when I was asked to talk here. PFAS are everywhere. What can we do about them? And they are everywhere, but maybe backing a bit, what are PFAS? Well, we have a restriction proposal. I will talk a bit more about it in a bit. that proposal is said to cover about 10,000 chemicals that belong to the PFAS family. So it is a family of substances that are fluorinated. These are PFAS. You might recognize some of them, or maybe here. So you have PFOA, you have PFOS. They are the C8. Examples of the C8 PFAS that are well known. Many people have studied them. There have been a number of different definitions of what is a PFAS, but the current definition is it's a fluorinated substance with either a fully fluorinated methylene group or a fully fluorinated methane group, with a few exceptions if there are halogens exactly onto this very single carbon atom. So the thing is that many chemicals are PFAS, and that's good to know when we continue this talk. They are also used in many different products. So this is a statement from Julian Glig and her co-authors. So she's a researcher at ETH in Zurich. So they state that PFAS are used in almost all industry branches and many consumer products. And they cover this in this excellent paper that has been used in many discussions and in many regulatory processes. They list in the end of the paper uses that they prioritize to look into further and see can we phase out PFAS. So they are firefighting foams, polymerization agents, surface protections for textile, for example, this carpet, I don't know, maybe there is PFAS here, electronic devices, machinery, fluoropolymers in plastic, rubber, coating, paints, varnishes. So it's everywhere in society. And are the big numbers then? So they are many, the PFAS, but are they used in big quantities? Well, in this restriction proposal that I will come back to in a bit, they quantified use and emissions of PFAS. It's of course a lot of uncertainty around these numbers because there are so many substances, but they estimated the annual use in the EU in 2020 to be 840,000 tons, with emissions created from this use of 75,000 tons. And the more worrying fact is that if we estimate emissions in the future in 2050, these would be 4.4 million tons of PFAS. But maybe we have a problem already now. So this map is from the project, the Forever Pollution Project. So a number of journalists went together to map out the PFAS problem. And the headings are from The Guardian, or maybe you can't even see it, revealed scale of forever chemical pollution across UK and the Europe. So what you see here, the red dots are known contamination sites, many red dots. The blue dots are presumptive contamination sites, because maybe we haven't measured everywhere, right? But with the knowledge of what uses we have, we can assume that we have contamination. The black dots are not even visible because we have so many contamination sites, right? But they are the manufacturing facilities. So the scale of the problem is large. And so is it then a problem? We have it in the environment, but will anything happen? Well, I will come into that. There is new threshold values for when we can expect that PFAS could have negative effects on human health and also on the ecosystem. So Matt mentioned that they have changed over time when we learn more. So the European Food Agency new guidance value, it's 6.9 when converted into blood levels. It has been so much lowered over the last 20 years or even 10 years for PFAS and PFOA, and now it's broadened to include more and more chemicals as we learn more. And that value is based on immunological effects. So if we have this level in our blood, if you breastfeed your baby, you risk giving immunological effect to your child, for example. Well, at Chemsec, we tested our blood. And at Chemsec, we sit in our office. We're not highly exposed to PFAS like people who would work in a manufacturing factory. Still, all Chemsecers had PFAS in their blood. And some of them even had it above this limit value of 6.9. So I think you're convinced already the PFAS is a problem, right? The main concern is the persistence, because this gives us this circulation of the PFAS in environment, and we are exposed, and it accumulates. So even if emissions continue and do not increase, the environmental levels will increase because the PFAS cannot be removed. Some PFAS are not highly persistent, but then they degrade to other PFASs that are persistent. So in the end, we have a problem. Many of them are mobile. They move around. So if you have an emission in one site, you will find them in another. For example, in the groundwaters that we use for drinking waters. Other are bioaccumulative. So levels increase in the trophic ecosystem trophic chains. And we get higher exposure higher up in the chain. And 10,000 chemicals, or even if you look in the PubChem database, 6 million chemicals are identified to belong to the PFAS group. So of course they have different properties, but some of them have been shown to be toxic to humans, immunological effects, effects on the liver, reprotoxic effects, cancer effects. So it's many types of effects. Some have been shown to be toxic to other organisms in our environment. Some have shown to have endocrine activity, so they affect the hormone system. Some accumulate in plants, others accumulate in humans, and many have long-range transport potential. So I think you're already with me here, that this is a problem, and we need to do something about it. KMSEC put a paper out last year, where we calculated the societal cost of PFAS to be 16 trillion euros. That would include the cost to remediate contaminated sites, the cost for PFAS-related health issues that the hospitals need to take care of, etc. And if you compare that with the revenue, the win that the companies make, it's a big difference. So we calculated the PFAS revenue per year to be 26 billion euros, a much smaller number. And the chances are, of course, that the societal cost is underestimated here, because that's, of course, a very tricky number to get hold of. So there is a reason to act, right? And it's bound to be quite difficult. What is society doing? Maybe we're doing something already now. Yes, we are. A lot of things are happening, and we should be very happy about that and proud, but we need to do more. Some examples first from what KMSEC is doing to support this phase out. For example, one of the tools I mentioned, we have tools on our website, we have a PFAS guide, because with 10,000 chemicals in many, many different uses, if you are a producer and you want to phase it out, it can be difficult to know, where do I find the PFAS? How do I know if I have PFAS in my materials? The PFAS guide can support you to show products likely to contain PFAS chemicals and give advice on how to phase these out. KMSEC also run the PFAS movement, where we have more than 100 members. And the companies that have joined the movement, they recognize that PFAS is a major health and environmental problem. And they support a group ban on all non-essential PFAS uses. And they have the ambition to do this phase out in their products and supply chains. And many of them have already. So that can be seen as an inspiration, and also there are many learnings to be made from their work. And my dearest tool is the SIN list. So I'm responsible for the SIN list at KMSEC at the moment. And the SIN list is a phase-out list. So if you know the EU chemicals regulation, you know we have the candidate list. On the candidate list, we have the substances of very high concern. These should be phased out and not be in use unless essential, basically. But the candidate list has been around for a long time, and still it's only a few hundred substances on there. So it's a good process, but it's a slow process to put a substance on the candidate list. With the SIN list, we want to accelerate this. So we use the very same criteria for when a substance is a substance of very high concern as for the candidate list, but we work quicker. So on our list, we have 1,400 plus substances at the moment, and it is continuously growing. So the idea is that the SIN list is a tool for the companies who want to be proactive. They don't just want to find what substances are banned or regulated now, but what substances should we remove to be ahead of regulation. And we see proof all the time that substances are being put on the candidate list, but we put them on the sin list in 2008 or 2015. And we also use it, of course, to put pressure on legislators to move forward with speed and urgency. So have a look at the sin list. It's available on our website. So that was some slides on what we do at Chemsec. And of course, there are other actors, and very important, the EU is, of course, having a chemical regulation, or many chemical regulations in place on PFAS. So what you see here is a simple graph where we have on the y-axis the coverage of PFAS by the different regulations. And then on the x-axis, you have, where in the decision-making process do we have this restriction or ban. So you have the universal PFAS ban. That was already mentioned by Per, I think. So there are a number of member states who've proposed a ban to proposed a restriction to get all these 10,000 PFASs out from society. So that is under discussion with ECHA at the moment. So the proposal is available for you guys to find on the web and read, and it is being discussed by the Risk Assessment Committee and the Social and Economic Assessment Committee. So we will see what the end product will be, but the idea is that we will get all the PFASs out, and that only when there are no alternatives, there will be a derogation from this ban, and that will be time set. This is the Chemsec message, and then we will see how the ban comes out. But now we have already a number of PFAS regulations in place. So you see on the right-hand side, the PFOS and PFOA, and the C6, the perfluorinated hexanoic sulfonic acid, they are already in the Stockholm Convention, so they are globally banned. And also not only these three, but also substances that can become these PFAS if they degrade. We have TDFA, which is also has a ban in place. We have the longer chain alkylated acids. They are the one called C9 to C14. They are restricted in the EU, and a ban under the Stockholm Convention is underway. We have a very new decision on the C6 carboxylic acid, the Perfexa here, to be restricted in certain uses, for example, textiles. And the FFF is firefighting foams. So a ban is underway also there. But you see, this will be fragmented, and we will have a lot of PFAS falling in between here that do not belong to the Perfexa category or the OXS category, but they are still a PFAS. So that's the idea with the universal ban, that you would cover everything. Other relevant policies, of course, several PFAS are substances of very high concern, identified as such, meaning that they have to be reported in the SCIP database, the database with waste materials. We have a new packaging and packaging waste regulation stipulating that we cannot have PFAS in food containers, for example. We have a toys directive coming up stipulating that we cannot have PFAS in toys. And there are a lot of limit values in water and food coming into place for PFAS, for a few that are already in place for PFOS, for PFOA, and they are being widened to encompass more types of PFAS. Things are, of course, also happening globally. So, for example, in the US, we have 34 states that have introduced 292 PFAS policies. In the US, they have a framework for addressing new PFAS and new uses of PFAS under the Toxic Substances Control Act. There are several other things happening in the US. In Australia, they have a PFAS National Environmental Management Plan and other actions happening. Also, China are discussing PFAS, Japan. So it's a global issue, and it's globally recognized. So a lot on the problems and the bans, but are there alternatives? Yes, there are alternatives. On our site, Marketplace, that's a business-to-business marketplace where we intend to show that there are alternatives for hazardous substances available, but also facilitating contact for the companies looking for alternatives. At the moment, we have 109 results when you search for PFAS alternatives, but we are adding more and more alternatives all the time. In the universal PFAS restriction proposal, they have found alternatives for most uses. So a substitution seems very feasible. There are, of course, a few uses where there are no alternatives. For example, in personal protection equipment, in medical devices, and those might take longer to resolve. But our message is, of course, that only essential uses of PFAS should be allowed to continue, for example, in medical devices. But also we need to empower research to find alternatives, to not settle down here and just say there are no alternatives. If we have research in place, there will be alternatives. We're quite convinced in due time. And policy needs to support this research and to support the market of the new alternatives. So this is another way of showing what alternatives are available. On the x-axis, you have the availability of viable, safer alternatives to PFAS. And on the y-axis, you have the volume of PFAS per sector. So this is very much based on the restriction proposal. So on the high volume, we have F-gas applications, so fluorinated gases, transportation application, too lucky is textile and leather and these kind of things, food contact material, construction products. And luckily, it's high volume, but we also have a lot of alternatives available. So it will be effective. On medical devices, a lot of research is ongoing, so we have new solutions coming up. A lot of PFAS are used today in very specific applications, but we see new types of polymers coming in, being possible to replace the fluoropolymers. We have some things that are already sold, luckily. So in cosmetics, we have gotten rid of a lot of PFAS or are on the way in ski waxes, consumer mixtures, chemical products that we as consumers use. And then we have challenges, for example, for electronics and semiconductors and in the energy sector. So do PFAS pose a risk to the circular transition? First, and I think my main message, PFAS in circulation is not part of a sustainable development. So that's the core of my message and the baseline. And then we saw a pile of waste again, and when we have circularity, this is textile waste in big chunks, balar in Swedish, and you see it's a mixture. It's different materials, it's different colors, they have been used probably for many different things. And some of them might contain PFAS, because we have them in textile to get the textile water and oil repellent. And PFAS can be a barrier to the circular transition. If we want to effectively phase out products that contain PFAS, then these products might be given a shorter life length or shorter circulation in society than otherwise possible. So then we will reduce the effect of the circular economy in a sense. But on the other hand, the circular transition, if we do not take care of the PFAS issue, can be a barrier to an effective PFAS phase out. So if we keep the phase out in the PFAS in the loop, they will continue emitting. So you remember the 840,000 tons of PFAS in use, they created an emission of 75,000 tons of PFAS per year. So when we have them in use, they create an emission, right? So we should not have them in use. We have to turn off the tap, but we also have to be careful with what we do with the stock we have in society already. And collection and destruction is part of the answer, right? So we have to identify where we have PFAS. And on the analytical side, there are more and more methods coming along where we can search for total organic fluorine, etc. So we can see any PFAS that is in the material. It's not that simple, but I mean, it's at least methods are coming, right, to cover these 10,000 PFASs. So we can find them. Which of these textile heaps can we reuse and which should we destroy? But also we need to think about destruction, that we do not just move PFAS from one place to another. Incineration sounds like the final solution. There's a big risk that when we incinerate, we just change the PFAS. So we have one PFAS coming in and another PFAS coming out. So we have to be very careful. If we clean water with activated carbon, many PFAS will stuck. But how do you then treat the activated carbon to get them out of circulation? So at Chemsec, we work with recycling companies, and I selected a quote here to establish this fact that we need quality and not quantity in our circular flows. So it's Cedric Lechat at SARP Industries saying that there is a need for incentives that encourage the quality of recycling, not the quantity. And I think for PFAS specifically and hazardous chemicals in general, we need to think about that. Maybe it's a transition period now. If we get very efficient chemicals regulation in place and we have a society free of hazardous chemicals, then we can have the large volumes. But at the moment, we have a lot of hazardous chemicals in stock in society, and we need to be careful with what flows we create. And of course, I think it's been mentioned already before, but plan for the waste treatment already in the design phase of products. That's one of the keys to avoid hazardous chemicals. So you see this meme when he tries to read the list, the very small list of recycled materials that this person can use, because he has a high standard on the quality of the flow. So we have a lot to do here. And that was the end of my talk, and I have no idea of time, but stay in touch with us at Chemsec. You see the website and contact information, and thank you for listening.
Well, you're very timely. You say that, well, now we are removing PFAS and they have found other ways. Is there a risk that we are creating a new PFAS scandal? Well, now we talk about, you remember we had a problem with DDT and PCB before. So the question is there a risk that something else will come around the corner in 20 years from now?
Hopefully not, because hopefully we are learning. But I think there needs to be this story to be told that we knew, society and especially industry knew about the hazards of PFAS a very long time ago, but no one acted. And now we're slowly waking up and doing the right things, but it's going way too slow. So the thing is, like, when we get these evidence, I mean, I think the first evidence of PFAS toxicity was in the 70s. And before, in the 90s, we discovered PFAS in people's blood. And then the phase out started in the year 2000 and onwards. And now it's 2024, and we're still not there. So that's, I think, of course, there is a risk. We went from the chlorinated, and we were scared of them, and then to the brominated, and we were scared of them, and now we are on the fluorinated, and we are scared of them. And I have no idea what's coming next. Matt is going to find out for us, right? But just to learn a lesson here, to act sooner. Ideally to avoid them, but to act sooner when we learn about the problem.
But it sounds like we have a big cleanup project ahead of us.
Definitely.
And don't use activated carbon. What's that your?
No, I think activated carbon can be used, but be aware that then you just collect the PFAS, right? And you have to be very, very thoughtful how you treat the activated carbon, because it's being reused, right? You don't just put it in a landfill, you reactivate it by heating it up. And you need to do that in a way, not just move the PFAS around, to remove them from the carbon and not create an emission at that site.
One of the later presentation will demonstrate the technology that in another way can collect PFAS. So let's come back to that, and you can reflect on that in the panel discussion.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for this. And now we have really deep diving into the secret of the challenge that we're facing to create circularity. Hopefully we can now start moving into, okay, how can we still have a circular transformation? So by that, thank you.
Thank you.
We have one secret thing on the agenda. We will have now a message from the Swedish EPA, the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, about the research project ongoing when it comes to PFAS, and what the cost for making sure that we can remove PFAS. So please, we will now have Björn Johansson from the Swedish EPA explaining about the new research ongoing.
Hello, my name is Björn Johansson and I work at the Soil Environment Unit here at Naturvårdsverket. We are currently working on a government assignment to facilitate and coordinate national efforts to manage the situation we have with the PFAS contaminated sites. There are uncertainties on how we should act and how we can act to manage the situations with all the PFAS contaminated sites we have. And we at Naturvårdsverket believe that it's better to use the tools that are available today in order to improve the situation rather than waiting for technological development and the knowledge build-up to catch up. Saying that, we believe that we need to act now with what we can and parallelly work on developing the knowledge and the technology that we have. As part of the government assignment I'm working on the project to make a socioeconomic analysis of different ways of managing the situation in a short-term situation compared to long-term situation, to try to show the value of acting quickly with what we got rather than waiting and allowing the contaminated sites to continue leaking, making the problems worse and probably making it more difficult to manage in the future. In doing this, we are working with the Swedish Geotechnical Institute and Chalmers University, and together we have developed a hydrogeological model of a likely PFAS contaminated site that doesn't exist but is representative for the problems for the society at large. And using that model, Chalmers will analyze different scenarios of acting on the situation in order to show the value of different approaches. We expect the results of this project to be very useful for us in developing guidance on decision making regarding contaminated sites with PFAS, and we expect results to be done by spring of 2025, and we hope that you're interested in hearing about them then. And by that, I want to wish you all a good conference from now on. Thank you.
Yes, so I believe that next year's part of the Future Day will likely include something about PFAS as well. We'll probably be able to invite the Swedish EPA to more go into detail what are the results, especially the financial dimension of the cost for society. We don't do it, we don't act now. So it's going to be really interesting to see this going forward. By this, we will now move forward with the pitch competition, meaning that we this year has conducted a pitch competition for throughout all universities in Sweden, and the headline was "Stop Being So Toxic." And we do have a winner. It's two persons, but we have just one here with us today. It's Carl Johansson that will present the winning contribution. And after that, we will have two from the jury handing over a prize of 25,000 Swedish krona and also a diploma and some flowers. So please, big hand for Carl presenting the study that you are about to do here going forward.
Thank you to Ragn-Sells and for having this competition. I would like to begin with sort of a description of why we think that this is the solution, or at least a part of the solution, to detoxifying our waste streams. So to begin with, our case was basically to use AI to enhance recycling of waste containing toxic substances. And my name is Carl Johansson. I'm a student at Linköping University. I'm studying a civil engineering course with a focus on energy, environment, and management. I was going to be joined by my friend Gustav Strolin, but sadly he has an exam today, so he couldn't be here. But I'll try my best to cover for him. So a little bit of background. I guess we have already heard quite a lot that is interesting to have our case. You have all seen this circular economy graph, and really we need to sort of close the loop, as we heard before. Our society is currently not very sustainable, and the time and the volumes of resources that are being extracted are not sustainable in the long term. Some resources will run out in our lifetime if no new deposits are found. Obviously, new deposits are always found, but in a sense, we have a critical problem. So when recirculating materials, we want to avoid putting these toxic substances back into our society. And that is basically where our case is based on. So we focused on looking at electronic waste and the processes being used to recycle this today. E-waste is mainly a manual separation job where we use manual labor to sort out components and products that include highly toxic chemicals and materials. And this has, of course, some benefits as to why it's being used, but in the greater sense, automation is necessary to increase precision and also the amount of resources being recycled. So how do we increase the amount and the precision of waste being recycled? We think that we can use, to begin with, databases. And I was planning to ask how many people have heard about the SCIP database, but now hopefully everyone has. So using a database that has collected all products on the European market that includes toxic substances, SVHCs to be specific, is obviously a great asset in recycling. And this is not that easy to always implement in the current process. When using this type of manual sorting processes, it will take quite a long time to actually find a product, look up an article number, and then search through a database, look through all the sub-menus, and then find exactly which components include what material and which chemical substances. So that is why we want to use AI to make this process a bit simpler and faster. So humans are extremely good at like seeing objects and observing and seeing differences between things. But we are not very good at actually having a lot of data stored in our memory available for use. And that is why we want to use AI, because AI is extremely good at keeping a lot of data available for use, but it's also it can also be good at recognizing, and in some senses it can also be better than humans at observing and recognizing different products and materials. But that obviously needs a lot of training. These kind of picture recognition softwares, image recognition softwares are dependent on having large data sets of information that it can base its decisions on. And our point is to connect these types of databases, such as the SCIP database, with image recognition software. So the challenges with this is firstly to find this high quality training data. It doesn't really exist on a large scale. The SCIP database doesn't include pictures. It doesn't include information that an AI can use to then find these products in a process of recycling process. So basically connecting both of these things is part of our case. Now, this will be quite time consuming and also cost intensive. Really accumulating data is something that takes a lot of time. And we can use AI to we can speed up this transition. We can use the SCIP database, the SCIP database, and we can use AI to find training data from websites and sources on the internet. As well, we also need to build the infrastructure and the hardware in the recycling centers, and this includes sensors, cameras, obviously also a large amount of processing power. A lot of data will be handled in a short amount of time, and this will obviously have to be handled. So really the conclusions that we have drawn in our research and in our case is that AI applications will be used by almost every waste management company that works with recycling, and the implementation will be quite costly and time intensive, and most importantly, data is key. What we found is that data is really what is the deciding factor if AI is going to be used for this sorting. So what we really want to recommend if you are in this sort of business is to look into trying to start and find data as soon as possible, because the company with the best data will have the best AI model and therefore will be the most competitive in this business. And something that can be good is to also look into these already existing data sets, such as the SCIP database. Yeah.
Applause. And by that, we need to have flowers, and we need to have diplomas. I will ask Anders Kiel to stand up and Lars Tolgren, because they are the two financiers of this pitch competition. So, and pictures need to be taken now. Perfect. And we look forward to hear more about this in the coming years. We will follow you definitely and be able to spread the results. So, and I think you two need to discuss more going forward, I believe.
We will. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. By that, we will move into solutions and continue with solutions, because this can maybe be one solution to make sure that we can decontaminate different kind of urban flows. Now we will have an input from Rickard Andemyr from Michelin. They have developed a solution to make sure that really contaminated products, in this case tires, can be recycled, or we can extract resources from them in a detoxification way. So please, we have a video message from Rickard, and we'll then hear him also online taking questions. So please, roll the film with Rickard.
Hello, my name is Rickard Andemyr. I am the sustainability manager with Michelin in the Nordic countries, and I've been invited here today to present to you a little bit about how to create a more sustainable tire. Thank you very much for this invitation. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to sharing this topic with you. We don't have a lot of time, so let's dive right into it. Okay, let's go. How can we create a more sustainable tire? Well, firstly, we need to understand that the car industry is undergoing monumental changes, or the vehicle industry, we should say. This is mainly user-driven, so it means that the drivers of vehicles are aspiring to greater comfort, more equipment, technology on board, which is leading to the vehicles becoming more technological, larger and heavier than before, and at the same time, we need to look after the climate emergency that we are facing and address creating more sustainable products. Now, when the car industry or the vehicle industry is changing, it has a direct impact on the tire business. This means that vehicles, for instance, are becoming heavier. It means we have to create tires that can carry this load and this weight. We have more unpredictable weather. In Europe, for instance, during a single day, you can have dry roads, you can have wet roads, you can have snow or ice that you face, and the products have to be able to cope with this. We have the electric boom that is occurring, and as well, the need for reducing environmental impacts is also, of course, critical when it comes to tires. So it's a huge aspect of different characteristics that has to change in order to make this effective, and it's really a challenge. So firstly, what should a sustainable product strive to be? We believe that a sustainable product has to firstly reduce its environmental footprint. Then we need to look at sustainable materials. We need to look at responsible logistics and manufacturing. We have to look at providing recommendations for proper and reasonable usage of the products and services, and as well taking care of collection and end-of-life valorization of the product at the end of life to assure that we can use the remaining raw material for something useful. Now, there are many different aspects we are working on, and many questions and demands are coming from our customers, from NGOs, from authorities, and from decision makers that want to change and want to have an insight into and a way to reduce the impact of tires. There's a lot going on here, and we have, as a consequence, we are working on several different areas, and you can see some of them here on the screen. I cannot go into all of them, but I will try to explain a little bit more about what actually is behind the environmental impact of tires and how we can reduce it with all these initiatives that are ongoing. We try to assess the environmental footprint of a tire, and when we do so, we use a life cycle analysis. Here it is simplified in 5 stages. We have design and raw materials, manufacturing, logistics, collection, valorization, and usage of the product, altogether making up the life cycle. This is based on a 16 criteria of the product environment footprint, so we're taking all of those into account in this life cycle analysis. Now, when we start to look at and try to understand the weight of those different impacts inside the life cycle, we instantly see that the usage phase is really the biggest one. At 84% in average, it takes a huge part of the tire's life cycle. Design and raw materials stands for 13%, manufacturing 1.5%, logistics and collection and valorization are less than 1% each. Why is it so? And what are the key parameters? Well, Firstly, if we look on the design and raw material stage, which stood for 13% of the impact, here it's firstly important to choose the right type of material, because that can reduce the environmental impact if we are using less harmful materials. Then the design and the mass is critical, because if we design products that last longer, we will need to produce less products. And if we can reduce the mass, it's the same impact, but a bit differently, that we can reduce the weight of raw materials needed and produced. So going to manufacturing, we are working on all those different aspects of manufacturing in order to reduce the impact there. Logistics, we are working on transporting less, transporting differently, and transporting better in order to reduce the impact of logistics. And then in the valorization phase at the end, of course, we are working on projects to recycle tire materials and to put them back into the material stage. So we do full circle, so to speak, and projects are ongoing there. But the usage phase then, why is it so important, and why are we spending a lot of research and development there? Well, tires have a rolling resistance. And rolling resistance, if you ever try to push a car, you can feel how heavy it is, and that is because the tires are deforming against the surface, and they create a resistance and a heat buildup, which is causing increased consumption of energy when this vehicle is moving. And for a passenger car, 20% of the tank of fuel will be consumed because of this rolling resistance. So that's how important it is. And then you can imagine, if we can reduce that rolling resistance of the product just by a few percent, it will have a huge impact on the fuel consumption of the vehicle, and thus the environmental benefits that this product can provide. So that's really, really important. The second most important stage is the longevity of the tire, because the longer the tire lasts, the less tires we have to produce, as I explained before. Then we have particle emissions, which are as well key. Particle emissions are inevitable from tires, because tires need to create friction against the ground. This friction is there for acceleration, braking, and cornering, and safety against the road. And when the tire has this friction and abrasion against the road, particles are released. And here our focus is to reduce, firstly, the number of particles, which is why we were very supportive of the Euro 7 legislation that's just been passed on particle emissions from tires. Here we need to reduce the number of particles, and secondly, we need to change the contents of those particles from the material side in order to assure that in the future they can be 100% bioassimilable, which is our objective. So if we then move to electric vehicles, will everything change for the better? Yes and no. If we move to electrical vehicles, 100% electric vehicles in the park by 2030, we can reduce the impact by about 20%. Because the European energy mix on that time will not be 100% renewable energy. So it means that what we have to do, we can reduce then by 20%, and the usage phase then stands for still above 80%, because there is still some burning of fossil fuels to create the electricity with which those cars will be charged, and there's as well particle emissions on the tires, and we still have the longevity aspect and all those things. So it means the usage phase still is more than 80% if we would move to 100% electric cars in 2030. But if we extrapolate until a scenario in the future where we have 100% renewable energy, what would it look like? Then the usage phase would go down to 45%, as you can see on the graph on the right side, and the raw materials would increase to 45%. And for that reason, it's extremely important that we start now already to work on the raw materials side in our products even more, and to improve it as quickly as we can. And what do we do really to answer to that? Well, we need to work on renewable and recycled materials now. The time is now. And even if we looked at 2030, we looked even further into the future, there's still some time. Why are we in such a rush? Well, just to explain that these projects take a huge amount of time. We had initiated a project in 2012, it's called Bio Butterfly, where we in 2023 were able to release the first kilogram of biological butadiene, which we can use in tire production. And so it's more than 10 years time for a project such as that. And you can imagine all the projects that we have in these areas. There's several of them that need to come and go hand in hand in order to come to a state where we can have more renewable and recycled materials in our products. So we need to start early and we need to work already now. A tire is composed of more than 200 different materials. It's one of the most complicated composite materials that we have created by man. So we have inside among those 200 components, we have textiles, we have additives, steel, we have synthetic rubber, we have natural rubber, and we have fillers of different kinds that we need to combine in order to create this product. And in all those areas are we working and having different projects, joint ventures, initiatives in order to improve on the material side. There's a huge amount of work going on in many different areas on these aspects. And how far have we come? Well, our ambitions and commitments. Today we have roughly 30% renewable and recycled materials in our tires, and we have the ambition to reach 40% by 2030 and 100% by 2050. So it is a challenge, but we are well underway, and we believe that we will be able to produce tires with 100% by 2050 to this day. And that's why we're starting early. We're working progressively on all these areas in order to get there in due time. Now, so what really does it mean? If we then have sustainable materials in our products, does it mean that they are more sustainable? Well, there are three criteria that have to be met for us to be able to say that. Firstly, a tire has to reduce its environmental footprint. That's key. Secondly, it has to be able to maintain safety while reducing the environmental footprint. That's another aspect we will not budge from. And thirdly, we're not talking about prototypes here, that those tires must be able to be mass produced, because otherwise we will not have the benefit of those materials inside them to the full extent. So those three criteria are really key for us to consider that the tire has become more sustainable. All right, that was it. Thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, please shoot. Or feel free to contact me if you have any more questions. Thank you very much.
And we do have Richard with us online, and we see if we can have him up on the screen as well. So I would like to stay with the one question about the recycling part, and especially the valorization when you're in the end of the tire's usage phase. Then it begins again, as I understand it. And the question is, of course, what are the type of projects you're working on when it comes to the valorization, and what are the potential to reuse the material in the tires for a new tire? What are you working on there?
There are several initiatives. I would say the main one is to extract carbon black from the tires and turn it into recycled carbon black that we can put back into tire production. There's also oils coming from this process. So those are two aspects where we can extract materials that we can then use into production. Of course, it's a scientific process, and we are working progressively on it, testing and evaluating the processes, because as I mentioned, we need to maintain safety characteristics and all other aspects, and we must be able to mass produce. So this means that it's an ongoing process that will take some time, but we are working to deepen our knowledge in all areas concerned.
On a personal level, I'm very impressed with what you have been presenting here, because it's a total mind shift from if I go 10 years back. So I'm impressed by Michelin and your work going forward, and we love to follow you. So thank you so much, Richard. Oh, thank you so much, Richard. And now we will move back to the room, and we will have a presentation about another planetary boundary. It was already mentioned by the professor in the beginning, and this is now we will focus on the biogeochemical flows. And we will have a presentation from Dr. Sara Tjärnström about two technologies that can recirculate two of the very important nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen, and of course make sure that it doesn't end up in the wrong places in our ecosystem. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Sara Tjärnström to present Easy Mining's two technologies.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super happy to be here. I'm very proud working at Easy Mining and at Ragn-Sells. I think we're doing a great job. I will talk about the way we are closing nutrient cycles. Yeah, I think you said it. I'm a doctor. I actually did my PhD at the institute where Matthew is working. And I think great minds think alike, because I totally agree that we need to do it right from the beginning. I'll come back to that. Easy Mining, we are fully owned by Ragn-Sells. We develop, design, and we have ideas. So we take everything from ideas to full-scale plants. And the focus is, of course, to recycle nutrients from waste. Waste is our raw material. And nutrients is our focus, but we have other things as well that we will recycle in these processes. We are about 55 employees at the moment, and Easy Mining was founded in 2007. We are located in Sweden, but we also have people working in Germany. Yes, so we were, and we have been part of Ragn-Sells in 2014. And these are the three main things that we are working on. I will talk about Aqua to N a bit, and then a bit more about ash to phos. But Aqua to N is a solution to recycle and remove nitrogen from different liquid streams containing a lot of nitrogen, for example, in wastewater treatment plants. Ash to phos is a solution to recycle phosphorus from sewage sludge. It's the sewage sludge ash that is the raw material here. And then on the right, you have ash to salt. And ash to salt is a solution where we recycle salts from ash also, but this is incinerated household waste. So just very shortly about Aqua to N and how that works with detoxification. And Aqua to N is a great solution where we can recycle a really interesting product, a recycled nitrogen product with a very low footprint. And it acts on liquid waste streams, streams that have a high ammonium content. This is it's a chemical process where you have a catchment step and then you have a conversion step. And you get a very clean ammonium salt that can be recycled back to farmers as a fertilizer. So and do we have detoxification here, which is the topic of today? Yes, we do. So there is a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that are saved using this technology. But also it removes the nitrogen, which also makes very good for the, we're not releasing as much nitrogen to the environment, to the recipient, so eutrophication, for example, but also the product in itself contains a less footprint. But then I would like to talk a bit more about phosphorus and ash to phos. And just to give very brief background, maybe most of you know about this, but we are very dependent on a few countries today to get our phosphorus. And in Europe, we only have one mine. It's located in Finland, and it supplies roughly about 10% of the phosphorus that we use and need today. And also, coupled to detoxification, the big mine in Morocco contains a lot of cadmium, and cadmium is a big health risk. Costs a lot of money for us when it moves down the chain into health and being a problem there. And therefore we need also solutions to take away the cadmium. But what this picture also says is that going forward we will be more and more and more dependent on these few countries. And therefore we need to have some other place to tap phosphorus from. And actually we have a lot of phosphorus in waste streams. One important waste stream is the sewage sludge. And in this value chain, incineration actually becomes a very important stepping stone to get chemical recycling happen from the ash. So incineration will actually make us, will enable high quality phosphorus recycling. So we have detoxification in this step. We can distract microplastics, we can distract a lot of organic pollutants, we can destroy drug residues and pathogens. Also interesting, we go from a very low concentration in the sewage sludge, which makes it very difficult, therefore, to have a cost-efficient solution going directly for the sewage sludge. But if we make it into an ash, we increase the concentration a lot and make it an interesting raw material compared to a mine where the amounts are much lower. It simplifies logistics, transports, and you can also have energy production with the incineration. And what is it we want to do here? We want to be part of a value chain where we have the wastewater treatment plants being resource plants, as Per talked about. We want the incineration to be part. We want to take the part between the incineration and the production industry, and we then want to be able to replace at least some of the mining, which could be more and more, depending on how much recycling we can actually do here. So we want to close the loop. And ash to phos also have detoxification for sure. So we separate heavy metals in a step, and these can be taken away, and we can either use it to recycle metals, or we can short-term deposit them safely. We save a lot of CO2 emissions as well, replacing, for example, this clean phosphorus product that we get instead of having the mined phosphorus. We also have other products. I will not go into them, but these will also do a lot of CO2 savings. Just since the focus is detoxification, just showing this shortly, we have the contaminants in the ash, we have the recovered phosphorus, and we have the reduction. And it's roughly more than 96% of the reduction of heavy metals that we can get from this process. So the detoxification is very good. And finally, I will show this beautiful picture. It's very self-explanatory, I think. But it has the same points that has been told over and over again today, that if we don't do it right from the beginning, we will have problems further on in the chain. And if we think about legislation, actually it's very linear today. Everyone is working with their part of the value chain, and the authorities don't seem really to cooperate. So someone can ban something further down in the value chain, while someone else is letting something be okay, so to speak. And I think, so I want to hammer that in, that we need to have a common goal, I think. If you talk about recycling of nutrients, if we have a goal to recycle nutrients, we also need to fit all these legislations into that to make it happen, because someone will need to take the cost. We can have the example of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive up there with the wastewater treatment plants. That's coming new, a new one, where it will be much lower limits for the wastewater treatment plants, for example, for drug residues. And then there's something called the polluters pay principle, which is a great principle, but it's not at all used. And now they want to use it here, in this case, to have someone pay for all the costs that we need to take away these drug residues. And these companies are, of course, now complaining a lot about this. So it might end up on the VA tax. So yeah, that was my last slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sara. What I'd like to mention or like to discuss with you is we know, both of you know the answer on my question, but of course I want you to answer it. The phosphorus that we now use, we can use it as a fertilizer. EU is working on allowing it as for organic farming. Tell me more about the process.
Yes, if that happens, I want a statue. No. But yes, so in organic farming, there's a positive list of things that are allowed. Like 1.5 years ago, we applied to get it into the legislation. You need to collaborate with the Swedish authorities. They need to approve and send it to the Commission, and then it ping-pongs around. But we're super happy now because the group, the experts within the EU Commission has said, yes, we think this is a great idea. So if everything works out, they will vote it in November, and then it will be part of the legislation in March next year.
I think it's an applause.
Yes.
And me and Sara met the person responsible for this expert committee in Spain just last week.
Yes.
And he in his presentation, he already presented it like this will happen. So now we need to see it happen as well.
Yes.
But we doesn't only work on organic farming, we also work on feed.
Yes.
Why and what is happening there?
The best fit is in feed. It has great digestibility in pigs and poultry. We have tested it. We're now running tests again with pigs in Denmark, and we see already now very positive results. So we want it, of course, to go into feed. It also has here the highest value. So we're working both to get it approved in Canada. And why is that? Because in EU, it's a total ban on everything recycled from waste. But we're also meeting up with some people in Brussels next week, DG Santé, which is responsible for feed safety. So maybe we can have an opening there. Otherwise, we will go to Canada, we'll sell it to Canada, and then EU will be like, maybe we want in on this. So let's see.
And why is this so important? Well, if we can get a feed price, the cost for the cities to treat the sewage sludge will be lower than today. So it means that the consequence will be that we can build many factories in the future. So that's an easy way out. You talk about higher VA taxes. We talk of potential of keeping the VA taxes if we can have our solution being implemented. So it's a good example. And we target high quality recycling. So it's a process that really produces a high quality. And that will be key going forward. If we're going to have new tires that we heard before, we need to make sure that what we recirculate, what we put in, need to have high quality. So all processes in the future need to have a detoxification step and produce high quality. I'm totally convinced of that. Thank you so much, Sara.
Thank you.
Okay, moving from the planetary boundaries, biochemical flows, phosphorus and nitrogen, we now move back to detoxification. And here we will have now an explanation of technology that can remove PFAS upstream so it doesn't end up in the wastewater treatment plants. So by that, I'd like to introduce our CEO from the company Kromafora, Johan Seimer, and have him to explain what is happening and what the innovation are and what are you doing in Europe and also outside of Europe. A big hand.
Thank you very much. So Kromafora, we're a Swedish leading innovation company that has developed water treatment technologies, unique water treatment technologies, but also are active in the field of applying the technologies for extraction of value metals. My name is Johan Seimer. I'm the CEO of Kromafora. Very happy to be here since Ragn-Sells is also one of our main investors in the company. So really thankful for including us in this important topic. So our PFAS treatment technology, which is a unique technology, performs better than existing technologies in the market in complex waters. And that is what I'm going to mainly talk about today. So PFAS, forever chemicals. I think Hanna made a great presentation of that. So we don't need to talk more about it. We know that it's a forever chemical, and that is the basis of the problem. The magnitude of the problem was also explained with this picture. We're sharing the same slides. It's a great picture published in Le Monde. There actually was a group of European magazine that did this forever pollution project on this publication. It's a website, you can really go into it, and it identifies more than 17,000 hotspots in Europe and more than 21,000 presumptive contaminations. And this is actually based on a quite small number of investigations. So for sure, there will be more once the service continues. But this is also important for us because it highlights where do we have the issues with PFAS. And this actually was published just when we were starting to look into our internationalization. And we have already received a lot of inbound questions from the area in Belgium and Netherlands. And I think this is a good explanation. Belgium and Netherlands is severely affected in Europe and quite important for us now also. So Chromafora, we are a provider of our unique technologies. We are packaging them now as a technology and focusing on the Sellpax technology for removing PFAS. Sellpax is our brand name for this technology. The technology is validated, has been operated in full-scale trials and proven, and we have worked a lot to secure the capabilities to scaling up through our backend, and then are now able to deploy this technology through our commercial team. But also to mention, we also have our other technologies, what we call Cellmex, that is addressing heavy metals, but also valuable metals, where we can use it for capturing value metals. I will come back to that a little bit towards the end. So our current customers, we are focusing a lot. This is, by the way, Ragn-Sells site at Häradsudden, landfills out of Stockholm, where we have our first installations, and there has been a very good development ground for the technology. We are focusing a lot on landfills, actually, even though Sellpax can remove all types of PFAS from most waters. But landfills are important because they are identified as hotspot. All this waste, what we saw on the first slide, are typically concentrated in these sites. So they're also important part of the ecosystem for PFAS to ensure that we have a safe capabilities of handling this waste and can ensure storing it in a safe manner. So we have customers coming to us saying that they have tried everything and that nothing works, and this sort of proves the uniqueness of our technology. And this type of specific issues we have at landfills and in many other industries also involves different types of PFAS or specific types of PFAS. And this is where our technology is very good at. So, of course, important drivers here are legislations. And here we see that legislations really drives market development. Belgium is in the forefront of Europe, have really tough requirements. And this is why we were contacted by Belgium customers saying that we have tried everything, nothing works, we need to find new solutions. It seems like you have something different. So what do we have? We have developed a technology which is outperforming existing technologies in terms of operating in complex waters. We are using a chemically enhanced membrane filtration. We use an innovative chemistry that is combined with ultrafiltration membrane. It's kind of surfactant what we use that is able to capture PFAS not only long but also short. And the technology is protected by patents, but also a lot of trade secrets and know-how that we have developed during this journey. The uniqueness lies in the performance. This is a schematic picture of how typically absorbents work, like activated carbon or ion exchange. They are have different efficiency depending on what type of PFAS. We already mentioned the C classification, basically indicating the length of the PFAS. C4, C5 are shorter PFAS, C6 also includes that, and then C8, C9, C10 are typically referred to as longer ones. So adsorbents work very well on long PFAS, but they have an issue with short ones, and this is because they drop in performance quite rapidly. And if you have a high share of short PFAS, that is when you say nothing works. We tried. We replaced the carbon, it works for 2 days, and then we need to replace it again. And this gives them an unpredictable performance because you don't really know. It works for long PFAS, but not for short. Our technology has a sort of sustainable reduction ratio, meaning a predictable reduction. Typically removing more than 90% of the PFAS, independent if it's long and short. Also with our technology, the longer ones are easier to catch, so we typically have a higher reduction on that. There are technologies like reverse osmosis that can take out basically everything from water. The issue with reverse osmosis is that it uses a lot of energy, 10 to 15 times more than we use with our technology, but also the waste ratio. We have a concentration factor of 1 to 1,000. So out of 100 or 1,000 cubic meter treated, we get 1 cubic meter of waste. For reverse osmosis, that ratio is in the range of 20 to 30%, meaning that it's impractical to use if you want to remove PFAS. Another addition, in addition to that, also the sensitivity for dissolved organics is really key for us in these waters. An example from the field, an extreme leachate site in Europe where we have been operating. You see the profile, PFBS is a C4. The one to the right is also a C4. So basically we have 2 PFAS elements and in really high concentrations. And the challenge is here, how can we reduce them with conventional technologies? It doesn't work. So with our technology, we ran a 2-step treatment, running it twice through the process, and we were able to reduce it with more than 97%. Still high levels after, but we have removed a lot of PFAS from that process. So Chromafora, we are not only about landfill leachates and PFAS, even though it is a huge opportunity for us. So this is why it is in our core focus. We see a lot of needs for expanding into new applications where we can handle different kinds of waste streams, including from reverse osmosis rejects. But we also have then the cell next and the value metal extraction. Just to briefly touch upon that, we are since a number of years working in a project with the Swedish Mining Innovation, where we are working on waste streams, applying our technology for recovering gold from different kind of waste streams, including electronic waste and so on. Now it's a collaboration between the Björkdal gold mine and the Luleå University and Chromafora's proprietary technologies. So this project is coming to an end next year, and we will then looking forward how we can take that development further. So we have a lot of interesting things in our pipeline to work with, but the key focus now is on the PFAS, and this is now the base for our commercial scale-up. So we are targeting and addressing this topic. We see that we have an important gap. We fill an important gap in the world of PFAS treatment, and this is how we see that we can continue to scale up. An important part in this scaling up is working with partners. So we have collaborating with integrators with water technology in this ecosystem that can take on our technology as a part of a larger treatment train. And this is what will enable us to scale this technology faster. In order to doing that, we have actually just this week launched a new website for our technology. It's called cellpax.com. This is something we will use for our partners in order to help them promote the technology, where then Chromafora is the sort of developer of the technology, but making this available. If you want to know more about the technology, we also have published a white paper with some technical insights that explains more about the technology. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Johan, for that. And what I would like to say is that in 2018, I had the opportunity to visit your site. It was a predecessor to you. And the discussion was, how can we make sure that you have a product market for metal extraction? And I happened to ask the current CEO, well, can you catch organic compounds? Yes, he said, we have tried on something called PFAS. Aha, there we will have a headache in the future. Can you develop a patent on that? Then you have a fantastic future. You have now the patent, you roll it in the market, so it's very short from patent to really addressing the market. So congratulations to you. Last week, we happened to be together in Paris, and I had a call from the embassy, in the French embassy here in Stockholm, and they heard about that we're building a phosphorus plant in Germany. And I said, why Germany, not France? And they invited me to present our different technologies. And especially interest was on the PFAS matter. So last week, we finally had the first discussion with the region of Paris. And I don't know, what is your impression? There was really a huge interest, especially from the PFAS. That was my feeling.
Exactly. No, it's really confirmed. And I mean, this is the case. Typically industrial areas, they mention Lyon as a key area for the PFAS issue in France. So they are addressing it too.
So the headache are growing, and you have a painkiller, might have a painkiller for some of that, not everything,
Exactly.
but for some.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Johan.
Thank you.
So by this, we have now seen different solutions to both recirculate resources, at the same time detoxify different flows. I would like now to invite back the panel, and the panel will be the three keynote speakers together with Anders Kiel, Head of Research for Ragn-Sells Group, but also Dr. Sara Stjernström. So please come up on stage. So my first question will be, of course, you have now heard about the importance to include a detoxification step in order to create circular material flows. So the question are, I think we're going to move a little bit here so we are all in the light, so we're not in the dark. How important do you think it is, and I'd like as an open goal here maybe, how important is it that we include now the detoxification step in a circular economy? Anders is starting. And present yourself, Anders, by the way, to the audience.
Hi everyone, I'm Anders Kiel. I work as head of R&D within the Ragn-Sells group. Now, my reflection is on this one. It's critical to have a detoxification step. The problem that we have at hand, it's dynamic and systemic. So by being in the end of a product cycle, as we as a waste management company is, typically you're always too late. There's a time delay. What is okay now is not okay tomorrow. What was okay 10 years ago is not okay. That changes all the time. So by not having a systemic dynamic view on this one, we will always be sort of having lack of sending back pure resources. And we need to do that. The world is sort of 7% linear, circular today, 93% linear. And that is sort of, if we can't change that, we can't meet the climate challenge. And we can't circulate toxins throughout the system, because then we hit another planetary boundary. So it's critical, and it's systemic and dynamic problem. And that is very hard to address, I think. That's the problem. It's a systemic problem.
Matthew, you were first out, so please, your reflection.
I mean, I think it's critical. I kind of said it in my talk. I hear the same thing again. I think it's a little bit, you kind of have an impossible task if you accept that at the end that the circular economy even works in a linear way, and that you have to accept whatever comes from producers. So I really think one aspect of the solution has to be detoxification of the whole system through simplification, especially of large-scale commodity items that we produce. And I like your red graph, which shows there are certainly thermodynamic limits to the circular economy, but I think even before you hit those thermodynamic limits, you'll hit practical limits. And I think even at the EU level, there's lots of people who talk about closing all these cycles, but I think a more realistic goal is close the cycles for 60% of the material flows, make those simple commodities, make that the circular economy, and accept that there will be some linear economy of specialty items that's much more complex and much more specialized, deal with that on a separate track. But I think detoxification within the circular economy is necessary and should happen as early in the production process as possible to make everything simpler for everybody.
And the report that Matthew mentioned was the ICC report launched on the 8th of October, where this detoxification model was introduced by Professor Lindholm.
Can I add a word? I just want to, I think I ended one of the slides to say that we have to make very careful considerations. So of course, climate change is a very urgent issue, and circular economy is one of the answers. I mean, how could we respond to reduce climate change? But not to be in too much of a haste, to be careful and to have the systems thinking to make sure that we can have two thoughts in our head at the same time. We can detoxify our society and go into a circular economy, maybe not 100%, but on the important flows. So keep these two thoughts in your head at the same time. Do not rush over the harmful substances to just address the climate change.
Thank you. It was a good over to me, because one thing I didn't mention in my presentation is that I think nowadays it's too much focus on the climate change, the climate issue. And why do we have that problem? It's because we are using our resources in our society in a very, very poor, and I would say, excuse the word, stupid way. We need to use the resources in a smarter way, because if we're not, we need a lot of energy causing a lot of environmental problems, etc., just to clean and keep the materials, getting in new ones and also handle the ones we already have in our society. But coming back to your question here, I think we need to do two things at the same time, because we need to deal with what we already have in the system, purify, clean up, not risking having accumulations of hazardous materials in society. At the same time, we also need to design things so we don't end up in this situation, actually keeping cleaner materials, cleaner flows. So we need to be in both places. But at the moment, I think too much focus is on the end, when we already have the problem. And politicians are talking about, okay, we should have this about 30% reuse of recycled material, without thinking what is the quality of that recycled material. It could imply that in order to make this possible to actually add in 30%, we will have a poorer quality in the end. We need to use more materials and not ending up in what we actually want to. So I think when doing this, we also need to think about the quality, and it was mentioned by several of the presenters. We need to have a think about what is the value, quality of what we get from the recycling, and to keep that value on as high a level as possible. Try to reduce the time to actually destroy high quality materials by not treating it in a good way in the recycling process. So I think we need to, it's very, very important, but we need to have dual perspectives.
Sara, for exactly 11 years today, you should never talk about the lady's age, but you're celebrating 11 years as a doctor
11 years today.
Woohoo!
Yes.
And tell me more about your exam at the same time as you reflect on the same question. But first, your background, what was your exam about or your PhD about?
It was about ashes. Surprise. So ashes and ecotoxicology. I'm an ecotoxicologist, and it was very applied work, focusing on looking into how to classify ashes, but also waste, of course, with ecotoxicity in mind. And I still think that it's lacking in the legislation, so it hasn't really happened in these 11 years, unfortunately. But to come back to the question, you took part of my answer, but I'll be short. I mean, I'm quite tired of everyone focusing on CO2 emissions, and they want to talk about the footprint of the product that we will produce without thinking about detoxification. And I think that's a problem. We have a lot of communication here to do, and it loops back to the legislations, of course, but I think if we continue putting all these pollutants in the value chain, someone needs to solve this, and that will come with a cost. It also comes with CO2 cost. So if you want a pure product, it will not be magic happening. That's important. And yeah, I get a bit tired. It's like you're this company working with funerals, and people come like, hey, can you stop people from dying? And you're like, but this is the wrong part of the chain. There's no magic happening here. We have to have a lot of chemistry. We will use chemicals because this is the way we make more pure products.
Then I have a question about the pitch competition and the winner, and have your reflections. I mean, AI, I have been like some bored over it. It's like more a good web search, but suddenly I see an application I'm really interested in by myself. But raw reflection about the winner and the potential.
Okay, so the issues we have, those are dynamic and systemic, right? And that is a fundamental problem. Now, what if you could do as this proposal, you collect the data from this database, you combine that with the pictures that you can find online. So this cell phone here, what does it contain? Does it contain some these elements? You store that, and after 15 years, when that cell phone ends up in the waste stream, you have the data, and you have it connected to a database that is updated, thus dynamic, meaning that you can adapt. Okay, now this chemical is banned. It was not banned when the cell phone was sold. So it's a dynamic approach, a solution that is fitting into a dynamic problem solving. That's the beauty about this proposal, and that's the rationale for me why you should have the prize.
Matthias, raise your hand as well.
No, you actually mentioned what I was going to say, and of course there are challenges in this, but the beauty is that you can easily update over time. There are challenges, but there also, I actually own an AI company doing things with sound, and I have friends that are really into this, and it has been quite interesting during the last 4 years to see the really rapid development in this. What was not possible when it comes to recognitions of pictures or objects in pictures just 2 years ago is now possible with high accuracy. And I foresee that that will continue to develop. But because of that, if we can start develop this system, it's more likely that we'll actually less data, learning data, in a few years we'll be able to track. But then we need to start developing this system right now. Otherwise, we will have more time, lost a lot of opportunities and time.
I have a final question, and that is, you have now the position to make a decision that dramatically changes things in society. What person should you address and what you want that person to do? Or what legislation should be changed tomorrow? Hannah, yes?
Well, I would like the universal PFAS restriction to come in place very soon and with as few derogations as possible, and you know, all of them to be time set, because we have the 10,000 or even maybe 6 million PFASs, and we want to get them out of circulation. I mean, all these detoxifying steps in the end, they're all good for what we have in stock, but we need to turn off the tap. And well, I don't know who I should address that to, the person who finally, you know, puts a decision. So it's now with ECHA, and I hope for a speedy process.
Ursula von der Leyen, she said before the election that we need to come with a decision about PFAS. And so we up to her now to make it happen. Sara?
I'm into the same. I would definitely go for REACH, and I would definitely put something in like no data, no market. If you don't know the risks, there's no market for your potential hazardous chemical.
I will end with Matthew, so please, Matthias.
Okay, I would have this approach to actually ban the right to sell products. Instead, it should only be possible for end customers actually lease or rent out to get paid for the function. So the responsibility will be kept by the provider, because that will change everything. Then you don't need to dig into the regulations about PFAS, because that will be an issue that the provider will for sure take care of. You will have longer lasting products, etc. And I see this as a way to increase Europe's competitiveness, because if you can do things with less resources, less losses over time, create more value, that is a way to increase your competitiveness.
Okay, I would address OECD, General Assembly, and ask them to sort of start implementing the polluter pays principle that you decided on 52 years ago. That would mean that a PFAS would not cost 1 SEK a gram, which it does now. Rather, it should be a cost of 1,500 to 3,000 a gram, because that's the full cost. And that would make adding PFAS or other stuff in the products in the first place not economically viable. So that's what I would argue for.
And we will see in the Swedish EPA study that we presented in the spring, the societal cost for just some contaminated sites, not all PFAS. So it's going to be interesting to see what is the real price there. Matthew?
I want to cheat a little bit and not address just one person, but address a whole generation of people who are young people in high school and below right now, because I think these are the only people whose brains really are flexible enough to comprehend what transformative change means. The United Nations Environment Program says we need transformative change to address the triple crisis of biodiversity loss, climate change, and chemical pollution. And transformative change means not only that you can't buy anything, you can only rent it, but it probably means that you have to nationalize industries that are currently, in the name of innovation, unnecessarily complicating our material flow streams with a bunch of stuff that makes products incrementally better but doesn't really deliver any real value. And I really think that if we're really interested in getting onto a sustainable track, we have to remake our systems so much that it has to be done by young people, and it has to be done over the next generation or two. All these incremental steps right now that we could take by talking to Ursula von der Leyen, I don't think that they're going to do it. And we need us to die and a new generation of voters to come in and take over. And they have to have this from the beginning as their goal, not, you know, maximizing GDP and building a big house and the kind of things that maybe we thought about when I was a kid as our goals for our life.
Thank you so much. I think it's an applause here for Matthew. Well, I'd like to now, I think it's time to come with the announcement, but, and you mentioned UNEP. Ragn-Sells will, together with UNEP, co-host a session at COP29. And the theme will be from wastewater treatment plant to resource plants, NDC 3.0. What is an NDC? That is what all nations need to put forward ahead of COP30 in Brazil. And UNEP are really clear that to make sure that we utilize the value in the wastewater will be critical. We will in that program also include Fasas and aqua2n, the technologies there Sara presented, but also Chromafora's solution as an example how to remove PFAS before it enters into the wastewater. So the 18th of November it will be live broadcast, and we'll make sure that we distribute the link to you as well. Thank you so much from the panel, and really great achievement and really great insights. The only sad thing, everybody agrees. Normally we have someone that disagrees. Next time I'll make sure I have someone that disagrees. We have now a gratitude before we stops everything. So therefore I'd like to ask Johan as well to come up on stage. And here you will have a little bit of a present from us. So please, Fredrik. I think you can do the distribution because I have a thing for you as well. And please stay in front of everybody here, Fredrik. The man behind doing everything and making sure that all the speakers are contacted and they are in time and have good presentations are Fredrik Holm. And I have a real present for you as well. So please, thank you so much. He is a graduate student, or graduating student from Linköping University, working part-time, making sure that the Framtidsdagen has been so successful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. This is the 19th day, the 19th future day, Framtidsdagen. And this year, we have been focusing on the importance of having the detoxification step in a circular economy. From my side, Ragn-Sells side, we really thank you for being here and also listening and viewing our broadcast. But please, Lars, take it out. What is your feeling after working so long for Ragn-Sells and also for the trust and hearing all this deep knowledge?
I think it's a good feel when you hear all this acknowledgement regarding these problems we have with chemicals and special chemicals and also solutions. And I feel quite confident actually. And I'm very happy that you and your team managed to make this day such a success, actually. And I'm really happy to be part of the audience here.
Thank you so much. And now it's time for lunch.